Dallas Cowboy Week. That's right. For those of you that watched the Cowboys and the 49ers in the 1990s, you know this is a big week. However, I still contend that unless the Cowboys find a way to beat the San Francisco 49ers, this is not yet a rivalry. Historically, yes, but between these two teams, only one team continues to win, and I believe that trend will continue on Sunday. But there's a lot to talk about when it comes to that matchup. And what does Brock Purdy have still to prove? We're going to talk about that, plus much more, next. All right. Welcome back to Last Second Sports. We are giving you our take down to the last second. It's Tuesday night, which means I got my guy So Real, Sunil, in the building. What's up, Sunil?
Everything is everything. I have a question for you, Jesse. Does T.O., Mr. Terrell Owens, have the greatest 49ers gift and the greatest Cowboys gift all at the same time?
Oh, that's a really good. Yeah. Oh, hold on a second. First of all, I don't like what you're doing here. All right. We do I'm going to peel back the curtain for everybody that watches. Normally, when I do my shows, we come up with topics prior to the show, like 5 or so topics. Sometimes we don't get to them all. Sometimes we do. Sometimes the chat takes over a little bit. Sunil's really good. He's really good about sending topics. But this week he sends topics and he says, and I got a mystery topic for you. So good luck on the show. So already I've got that like just hanging over my head like a rain cloud. I have no idea what crazy question he's going to come up with this week. Last week he made me sweat. Now he's asking me to start the show. Does T.O. have the best 49er and Dallas Cowboy gift? Oh my gosh, dude. Yeah, for sure. The Cowboy one. Absolutely. I would say probably the 49er one too, arguably. He's got some good ones. He's got some good ones.
Isn't it crazy, though, that like this is really the Terrell Owens Bowl because he has the greatest 49ers gift, which is him running down to the star and doing the whole, that.
Yeah.
And then he has That's My Quarterback as a Cowboy, which I think is the greatest Cowboy meme. So, hey, shout out to Terrell Owens.
Oh, T.O. Actually, he was a topic on the show earlier with Ryan. In a roundabout way, I'd asked a question about, is CMC the best weapon the 49ers have had since Jerry Rice? And people brought up T.O. It was a good little discussion. But we have our own discussions to get to. All right, Sunil? Discussion number one. Is this defense going through a regression with Mr. Wilks at the helm? I mean, one thing, I you know what? I don't pat myself on the back too often, Sunil, but if somebody's not going to toot your horn for you, somebody's not going to toot your own horn or your horn for you, beep, beep, if you know what I mean. One thing that we talked about ad nauseum this offseason is about how the 49ers were going to be more of an offensive team than a defensive team. And all this week, everybody else wants to start talking about, well, maybe the 49ers are more of an offensive team. Never thought that would happen. Guess who thought that would happen? We thought that would happen. We talked about it all offseason. But with that means now people are saying, well, is the defense regressing? And if so, is Wilks at fault? What do you think here?
So, it's the way that people criticize Brock Purdy, I think, is the way that maybe you can criticize the 49ers defense, because stats-wise, what they're putting up, the numbers are what they are. They're still holding teams to 12, 13 points per game. Obviously, like, they're stopping the run. The passing game has always been kind of where their Achilles heel is. And, teams are able to move the ball sometimes through the air on the team. But the eye test, this defense doesn't look as dominant as it has in previous years, right? It's kind of like a last-second interception is what ended up changing the trajectory of the game. Or, there usually, I think in previous years, the defense has had multiple kind of like wow moments where you're like scared to go up against this defense. I don't know if I'm seeing as many of those moments, but it could just be a feelings over facts things, because the numbers just still are still very, very good. They're still a very highly ranked defense. My question, I know you've been pretty high on Steve Wilks. My thing with Steve Wilks is he's never really managed a defense that was, upper echelon elite in any of his defensive stints. He's obviously a well-respected coach in the league, but as far as just his defenses, I don't think he's ever had a top 10 defense. I could be wrong with that, but with him as a defensive coordinator, I don't think he's had a top 10 defense. Now, the question was, when he has the amount of talent that he inherited of the 49ers, is his principles, because he's always been well-respected, going to translate to just a lights out defense? And I guess for me, where I'm talking about the regression, it seems like everybody thought that when he comes in, he's going to secure that last link, right? We had the defensive line that's always been dominant, the linebacking core that's always been dominant. It was always the secondary that was that Achilles heel. I don't know if that's been tightened up to the extent that we expected under Wilks. Maybe that was unfair expectations, though. That's why I wanted to see how you felt about that.
I think, what's interesting about this team? Well, two things. One, I think when the offense starts to look, quote unquote, better than the defense, people are like, well, I'm used to this. What's going on here? The defense must suck. And, looking at the numbers, I mean, they're only giving up 14.5 points a game. They've forced some turnovers, maybe not as crazy as they were at times last year. But when you look at this 49ers defense historically, let's look at last year. I remember specifically, they didn't force a lot of turnovers in the first half of the season. Once Brock Purdy took over, they started forcing double the amount of turnovers that they had in the first half of the season. And, we talked about that as being a big reason maybe why they were getting over 30 points a game and what have you. If you go to the year prior, I specifically remember through like the first 7 or 8 weeks during that year, they were giving up 130 yards rushing a game. It was a lot of rushing yards per game. They couldn't stop the run at all. Then they played the Rams. The Rams are like the slump buster for the 49ers. They play the Rams. They hold them to like 52 yards rushing. And from that point on, they gave up one 100-yard rushing game from like the whole second half of the season through the playoffs, everything. So this defense, oddly enough, does tend to start a little bit slower. Now, 2019, I think, was a different story. They were just hot from the get-go. But 2021 and 2022, there was things that you could point to with this defense where you're like, I don't know if it's the same. Are they as good? I don't think what's happening now is really much different than what was happening before, other than maybe the teams to start haven't been as good. And so actually the numbers, oddly enough, look better. They're not giving up a ton of rushing yards. They're not getting gashed. There's like one drive you can point to in all the games where you're like, yeah, but the one drive. And outside of that, that's it. Like, we're giving teams credit for one good drive a game. That's how good the defense has been. So I don't think that I am worried about the 49ers defense. I don't think it's necessarily taking a step back. Now, I would like to see the second half of the season. And if they can amp it up, I think that would be par for the course. But I think a lot of it really does have to do with how good this offense looks right now. It's finally taken the shine away from the defense, who, by the way, is only giving up 14.5 points a game.
Right. And I mean, like I said, this is all more feelings over facts. I think just the eye test, right, which is what people, want to criticize Brock Purdy on. We're going to get into that later. But the eye test, to me, this defense doesn't look as good as it has in previous years. That's what my question is. Do you think the eye test, Jesse, that like just visceral feeling when you watch this defense, do you still look at it as that dominant defense that's top 3 in the league kind of defense? I don't know. They're not spoken about, I think, as highly as some of these other teams in the league, which is different from, what we've seen in previous years.
You know what it is they're not getting after the quarterback as relentlessly as they have in the past. I think that is the difference. When I watch it and I'm looking at it, I'm like, even when they've had their struggles, they usually can get after the quarterback a bit, or at least that's the feeling I've always gotten is we know the front four, they're not going to have to blitz. They're going to be able to get after the quarterback whenever they want. There are long stretches throughout this season where they're getting almost no pressure. I think that is the difference. So if you're just going off of the eye test, that's what I'm seeing where I'm like, okay, they've got to pick that up. They've got to figure that out. But I think, like I said, it's no different than past seasons where, 2021, it was like, they can't even stop the run. They're getting gashed for 130 plus a game. Like the eye test told us they couldn't stop the run. And then the stats back that up. And then last year it was like, yeah, the defense is really good, but they don't force any turnovers. Where are these turnovers at? Like the year before, it seemed like they went long stretches, weren't forcing turnovers. Here we go again. They got Charvarius Ward. They moved on from Tart and all these other things. Are they going to be able to start forcing turnovers? And they couldn't. And then they started to. So that's why I'm saying I agree with you. There is something about the eye test. It's definitely the pressure for me and getting after the quarterback relentlessly. But overall, when I just look back at other seasons, there was other eye test things and statistics that back that up that said, okay, they do start a little quote unquote slow defensively.
Yeah. And I mean, this is another year where we have a brand new defensive coordinator, right? So I remember there was kind of like a learning curve initially with Saleh before he got his defense to where it needed to be. Same thing with D'Amico Ryans. There was some things that he needed to tweak before the defense really hit its stride. This is obviously Wilk's first 4 games as the defensive coordinator. I'm sure he's figuring things out. But so, I mean, obviously there's going to be time. We're going into a game where they do need to get to the quarterback if they want to have a chance to really dominate. And, I just watched a game last night where the Seattle defense sacked Danny Dimes 10, 11 times. And the 49ers struggled to get, multiple sacks against him. So to me, it's just like there's something missing to me. I know people in the chat, it seems like nobody's too worried about it. And I'm not saying that I am worried, but ultimately, I'm going to be way more confident when this defense gets back. And I hope it gets back to a point where they're, having 3 to 5 sacks a game, getting multiple turnovers per game. Even though it hasn't been needed, Jesse, I still think it's important that they're able to get to that gear because there are going to be games coming down the line where I think they do have to get to that point.
Yeah, most definitely. And I'm just kind of like looking through the box scores of these games to see if maybe it's different than what I'm thinking. And I mean, no, it's not. Like it's kind of what I'm thinking. Like the defense right now, here we go. Total rush yards given up 41, 89, 29, and then last week finally gave up 105 because they faced a mobile quarterback. Like their defense is just holding stout. And they're not finishing with a ton of sacks. Nick Bosa, he's killing it. He has 10 QB hits. Hargrave has 6. And then outside of that, it's like a bunch of nothing. You've got Fred Warner has a QB hit. Greenlaw has a QB hit. Drake Jackson has 3. They were like all within week 1. What the hell's he done since then? Farrell, Armstead, they have 3. Most of those came in week 1 for Armstead as well. Kerry Hyder has 1. Like they have 29 QB hits and 13 of them come from 2 players.
Right.
So they're just not, and they're not getting home as much. I mean, you have nine sacks in 4 games, which isn't, I'm not saying it's a horrible number, but you amortize that out over the course of the season, you're talking about 9, 18, 27, like less than 40 sacks on the season. Like that's not dominant pass rush numbers.
Coming off a year where they had close to 60 last year.
Yeah. And again, I'm not panicking by any means.
Yeah.
And sacks aren't the only number, but it's clear. Like that's the one thing. If we're gonna get nitpicky, I guess they got to get after the quarterback a little bit better with the front 4. And
last year they were top 3 in sacks, I think, and they were number 1 in turnovers. Right, so it's a high bar that they set last season.
Defense,
So I think it's fair to say that there is a regression because they're not playing at that level, right? My thing is, can they get back to that level under Steve Wilkes? At this moment, nothing that they've played beyond well enough for for the 49ers to dominate in all of these games. But there is going to be a stretch where I do think they need to tap into that level. And I'm just wondering if you feel like under Wilkes, you've seen enough to believe that they can get back to that level. Just something to think about, right? We're obviously nitpicking at an undefeated team, but we are used to a certain level of dominance on defense. And even though we're extremely glad that the offense is clicking on all cylinders, that doesn't mean that we should give the defense a free pass.
Yeah, so the 49ers, I'm just looking at it last year. They forced they had four forced turnovers actually, I apologize. They had 6 forced turnovers through 4 games. This year, they've got 5. So, they're right there. But 3 of those came in one game, too, against the Seahawks. They don't have any, 3 turnover games. So, really, it's like they're kind of on par. I think they're just starting out a little slow. I think the defense can get there. I do. But you are right about Wilkes. I will say that about Wilkes. You know that I was big on him coming to this team. I preferred him over Fangio. I just thought it'd be a cleaner break to go to him. And I like that he's here. I do think that they can amp it up, and I think they will. I think he'll improve as a play caller. But you are right in the sense that he's never had that top-tier defense. So regardless of why, it just hasn't been there. So that's a real thing. Celeste says, what up, brothers? Hope all is well. My question is, CMC the biggest trade in Niners history so far? I think so. Keep rocking.
In Niners history, huh?
Ooh, I don't...
Was Dion wasn't a trade. Dion was a straight free agent signing.
Yeah, he's a free agent. But they traded for Steve Young. I mean, is he a bigger trade than Steve Young?
You got to say he is bigger than Steve Young because Steve Young brought a Super Bowl, right?
Steve Young is the top 10 quarterback all time. I'm going to go with Steve Young.
Trent Williams was a big trade too. He obviously changed the whole offensive line when he came in.
CMC's up there, though. He's definitely up there for sure, yes.
I'm going to go Steve Young. I'll go Steve Young too. He's my favorite player. So
sorry, a bias. Kless comes back and says, member for 7 months. Hell yeah. I'll be here another 7 months. Thank you, Kless. I appreciate your support, brother. Knees says, defense is solid, but I can't be the only one slightly annoyed that Seahawks got 10 sacks and can't help to think of it is the soft coverage we allow for quick outs. Our guys can't get there in time. Well, Seattle has elite corners. That's one thing that Seattle does have. Well, they had one elite corner, and then they drafted a guy who we thought could be elite. After last night, I think he can be elite. That man, Witherspoon, was going crazy last night. They have very good corners. A little bit the antithesis of the 49ers, where the secondary is elite, pass rush is, good, but not elite. Same thing with the 49ers corners. Good, not elite. The pass rush has to be elite if that's the case. So we'll see. Seattle... I think Seattle's just a pretty good team. They got the Giants. Good for them. 49ers got their win also. But the sacks would be nice for sure. Cryptic says, does the 30-point streak end this week? Dallas matchups have been close to around 20 points for the win. Playoff matchup, CMC and Purdy didn't go off. Wow, that's a really good question. I don't know. I want to answer you because you paid and asked the question, but the score thing is I ease into that. Wednesday night when I do the behind enemy lines, I'm easing in. I'll tell you my early thoughts. My early thoughts is I actually have them under 30 this week, but not by much. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think the streak ends. Usually when there's defenses as good as the 49ers and the Cowboys, it tends not to be too much of a offensive juggernaut type game. I think Dallas does a really great job against this 49ers offensive line historically as far as getting to the quarterback quick. So, luckily we saw a game where Brock Purdy handled the blitz very well. So is it possible that the streak stays alive? Yes. But if I'm a betting man, I'd probably go with the under 30 points than the over on this game.
Yeah, I think one thing Dallas brings to the table, though, that some of these other teams don't. Some of these other teams had to blitz like crazy to create pressure. Dallas doesn't. They can truly get pressure with their front four, which makes them unique and tough, much like the 49ers have been for years. The 49ers create pressure with their front four, which means they can drop 7 in coverage and really play a lot of the passing lanes and make it tough on quarterbacks and still get home. Dallas is the exact same way. So if they can start to get home with 4 and then drop 7 in coverage, that's what makes them a little bit different than just immediate pressure on Purdy, where, okay, you may be getting fast pressure, but if you're sending 5 or 6, somebody's going to be open immediately. There's always going to be somebody open. As long as you know your hot reads, you're going to be good to go. What happens when they're getting home just as fast, but they have 7 in coverage? That's what makes it a little bit more difficult. I think that's the unique challenge that they bring to the table. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more potentially as we go on. Deebo Samuel struggled a little bit this week. Deebo had 2 very good weeks. The last couple weeks, actually, when Ayuk was out and Ayuk was injured. I mean, he carried at times the 49ers, but he's had kind of a couple weeks here also where he's not been a big contributor, and this week was one of them. What do you have to say about that? I mean, we talked about the defense. Like, are you worried about that? Or is it just one of those things that it's the CMC show and these other guys got to deal with it? Like, just overall, what are your thoughts with him, quote unquote, not contributing this week?
Yeah. And once again, this is all feelings over facts because the eye test, what you're hearing out of the locker room when people are interviewed about these type of things, the culture with the 49ers is completely intact. I don't think anybody really feels as if they need the ball. You can see when Brandon Ayuk is having a huge game, Deebo is his biggest supporter, right? And vice versa. When Deebo goes off, Ayuk is right there cheering with him, doing the dances, all that kind of stuff. CMC getting 4 touchdowns. You saw everybody cheering him on and getting excited about it. So I don't think that, at least right now, there's any issues with it. And thankfully, Deebo already got paid. Now, if Deebo hasn't gotten paid, maybe we're having a different conversation because we do know that the wide receiver position is the most diva position of them all. And out of the wide receiver crew that we have, the only one that might fit that kind of diva kind of characteristic would be Deebo. I would say, Ayuk hasn't really given any of those flashes. We have seen some out of Deebo, but it is something to keep an eye on, Jesse, because ultimately we've seen, guy like AJ Brown from Philly, if he's not getting the ball enough, complain about that. Not necessarily because he's a me first guy, but he wants to be able to make sure that he's contributing to the team winning, right? We've seen that guy like T.O. that we just mentioned. If he's not getting the ball like he wants to, he's gonna, he's gonna start demanding it a little bit more. I don't know if Kyle will let it get to that point because he does obviously value Deebo, and you saw him try to get him in with a few sweeps and things like that. But it's starting to show that when Brandon Ayuk is healthy, him and Purdy have a special connection right now. Purdy definitely trusts him, and you can see why. You can just throw it in the relative direction of Ayuk, and he's going to make a play on the ball and get that, right?
Catch radius is crazy.
Yeah, and we've heard about that all in the offseason, last offseason, this year's offseason. This is the first year where it's really translating to where it's just throw it up, and this guy is going to catch it no matter where it is, thrown short, thrown high, thrown too far to the left, thrown too far to the right. He's going to figure out a way to get that ball. It's hard to not want to throw it to him if he's going to do that, right? Because we do know for everything great Deebo does, he's usually top in drops when it comes to the 49ers receivers as well, right? So I think it is a little bit of what you mentioned. Obviously, this is a CMC-centric type offense, and, when you got a weapon like him, you got to use him as much as possible. But when it comes to the receivers, I think there's a separation being created as far as abilities, and Brandon Ayuk is just a better receiver than Deebo at this point.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. He's a much better receiver. His catch radius is out of control. His route running is out of control. He's a better blocker, a more willing blocker. He's just really, really good. He's really good. Debo's a Swiss Army knife, and we've talked about it a million times. But with CMC here, it does make it harder for Debo to shine at times. But there are times that he does still. The thing about Debo to me, and we've talked about this a little bit as well, that's the most disappointing is that he's in better shape. It's not about the numbers for me. It's about the effort. That's where I get disappointed in Debo a little bit. Last year, it showed up a lot. He didn't show a lot of effort when the ball wasn't going his way. He figured, okay, he's conserving energy. Once he's in shape and he's in great shape now, things will change. It hasn't changed. You watch him play in and play out. He is not. He's not even as much of a willing blocker as, I mean, anybody else on this team that's a wide receiver. I don't. He's like the least willing blocker out of all of them, other than maybe Danny Gray, who didn't play a lot last year.
That's why he
isn't
didn't
on
make
the field this year. Right. So for me, that's where I get disappointed. Or if he's on like an orbit motion, he doesn't show any interest, even though the ball's not going to him. So those are things that I wish Debo would do a little bit better. And then, really, who cares about some of the numbers? Like those are going to come and go. Yeah, Debo this week though was injured. He was hurt, not injured, I guess. He was hurt. If he was injured, he wouldn't have played, but he was day to day. It was questionable whether he would play. He did end up suiting up. I think that factored into it, along with Ayuk coming back. It really was just a two-man show this week. Kittle, let's talk about Kittle for a second. Talk about non-contributing player so far.
Before we get to Kittle, though, are you worried at all, knowing Debo's personality, that if there's multiple games like this, Jesse? Because even in week 1, where Ayuk was healthy, right? Because Ayuk's only been healthy week 1 and then last week, right? Debo was outshadowed majorly, right? I think he only had 3 or 4 catches, maybe, but very low yardage. Was pretty much a non kind of like, let's say, fantasy option. A lot of people's fantasy teams aren't happy with Debo right now. Do you think it'll become an issue, knowing that out of, just like you said, he's the least likely to block, he's also the most likely to complain, right? So is that something to pay attention to?
I think as long as they're winning, they're good. And I expect this team to keep winning. So I don't think it's going to become an issue. I don't. No, I don't. I also think Debo's interesting because I remember the run that they made during the 2021 season against Tennessee when he was the offense. He was broken at the end of that game. He did everything he could to win that game, and they didn't. And I felt so bad for him in that moment. And then the NFC Championship, he's on the bench crying. The only time Debo is shown any sort of possible malcontention, if that's even a word, I don't know if that's a word. It sounds good though. I'm going to use it. If he showed any type of malcontention, it would have been during the contract stuff. And that's when he was trying to get paid. I thought it would be DK would be the one that would be like, give me a trade. I want out of here. But it was Debo, and DK was relatively quiet. That's the only time. Other than that, I think Debo's been a good teammate. I definitely think he wants the ball. I think all competitors want the ball. But I don't think he's going to be an issue, especially if they keep winning. I'm not too worried about it. I'm not.
Good. And then I didn't want to cut you off on the Kittle point. Do you think that Kittle needs to be in this offense more, or, they're scoring well without him? Do we just keep him as a blocker and try to keep him as healthy as possible moving forward?
I mean, definitely he needs to stay healthy, but you can't just not contribute to the offense for the whole season to stay healthy. We need you to do something. I mean, even week 1, it was interesting. I was like, okay, they're going to keep him in to block a ton. I don't expect a lot of offense to run through him because of it. They didn't keep him in to block a whole lot, actually. I was very surprised. They left Watt and McKivitz out on an island quite a bit, a lot more than I felt comfortable with. So it wasn't that he was in blocking and just helping things out. Again, not another guy who's not going to be a malcontent by any means, but man, it would be nice to see him contribute offensively and get a few passes thrown his way. I don't know. He's interesting because I thought out of all the players last year, we knew CMC would continue to be great, but he and Purdy had this chemistry. I was like, man, this is going to carry into this year. He's going to put up a ton of touchdowns. He might go over 1,000 yards again. We might get 2018, 2019 George Kittle. That has not been the case. So that's the one to me where I'm like, okay.
I do think that it's going to be matchup dependent. I mean, this is obviously just an what is it called? An embarrassment of riches. It's like
it is
the ball. There's only one ball, and you have so many people that could be excellent with it. I think obviously it being CMC 1, it looks like Brandon Ayuk 2. 3 and 4 are Debo and Kittle. I think like a matchup like this week against Dallas, you can see Kittle being utilized more because of the style of defense that Dallas plays with the one high, and that's usually good for tight ends that can really run down the middle and make plays that way. So it's possibly a matchup to matchup thing, but I think a pecking order is starting to develop, whether it's been designed that way or not. But it's obviously CMC 1, Ayuk 2, and then Debo and Kittle, depending on the matchup, it looks like.
Yeah, and I do find that interesting because Ayuk had the nefarious tweet this offseason where he said, if I'm the 5th option on the team or 4th option on the team, if I was the number 1 option on another team, like I'd go crazy basically. Well, you're the number 2 option on this team right now, my guy. Yeah. You've passed Kittle and Debo, and I think fair. I think that's completely fair. He should be right now. He's playing very good football. He is ascending in a big, big way. So I'm not even mad about it. Roadhog says Purdy not getting enough credit. Feels like people forget this with no offseason. He's killing it. No, I agree with that. I mean, the whole offseason thing, said it a million times, but just being back week 1 was huge. Then to be as good as he was the first few weeks of the season was huge. And now you're starting to see him make some steps towards even being better than he was early in the season. I agree with you on that. Brother Bob says, nails, tripping. We're hanging 40 on them boys. And we'll see. I haven't given the official score prediction. I'm just telling you in the moment, this is what I feel like. I meant you and Sunil. P.S. Debo was hurt. We good. Yeah, he was, but I do think Sunil has a point here. The pecking order seems to be very clear at this point. Cryptic says, the same way Shanahan was true to his word about getting the other running backs involved, I can see him dialing up plays to get Kittle and Debo involved. Yeah, maybe. Rammy Ram 84 says, here's $1.99. Appreciate you, Rammy Ram. Brother Bob says, finally, Sunil is right. 1 ball, but a ton of weapons. 4 weapons, 1 ball. Got it. Okay, let's talk about Brock Purdy. In your opinion, if anything, what more does Brock need to prove? And this is a loaded question. You can go a million different ways with this, right?
So the reason I brought this up is I actually had the discourse on Twitter is really fun for me. I feel like I have some really great guys that continue to kind of challenge me and get into some really good discourse. So I think one of the topics is Brock Purdy a top 10 quarterback, right? Based off of his numbers, just stats wise, he clearly is. He's top 10 in every single important category that a quarterback has outside of touchdowns thrown, right? But mic drop with Mensa, I want to shout him out. He made this point, and this is kind of how I wanted to ask the question. Is it possible for a quarterback in their first 3 years to even comfortably be placed in the top 10? And the reason why I asked the question is, we saw a guy like Mac Jones who had pretty good rookie year, took his team to the playoffs. And then obviously we see him now, not clearly not even a, top 15 quarterback. If, might not even be a top 20 quarterback. We see a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who I think a lot of people look at and say, hey, that's a top 10 quarterback by some of his years. But then you see, this year, I don't know if you could really say he's a top 10 quarterback, even though he's gotten better weapons and, a year longer in, Peterson's system. So when I ask what more does Brock Purdy need to prove, at this point, is there anything he can do, Jesse, to even be considered a top 10 quarterback? Or is it always going to be, we don't know because the sample size is too small?
I think everybody's different. And that's what makes this fun. That's what makes sports fun, is everybody has different opinions. I think your question's interesting because whether it's intentional or not, I mean, it's really kind of directed towards me because I am the 3-year guy. Like this, you've heard me say it a million times, 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. I've always been that way. And even for Hurts, who in year 3 started to prove it, I said, that was great. And it was an MVP type year. But now that he has proven it, I just give me a second year like that. And then I'll be a full believer. I just want to see it. Just show it to me. So I am like the 3-year guy. Here's what I want to say about the situation. I think because quarterbacks are constantly coming into the league and exiting the league and new starters come along every year, I think the better way to start having the conversation, and really this whole Brock Purdy situation has kind of shed light on it for me, is instead of saying, hey, is this, you can have your top 10s or your tiers or however you want to do it. I think this league is turned into such a week-to-week league and year-to-year league that really your rankings should be fluid and power rankings. And the difference between a power ranking and an actual ranking are very, very different. Power rankings are literally week to week. Last week, the Miami Dolphins were the number 1 team in the NFL. Well, they lost to the Buffalo Bills, and now the 49ers are there. Or the Buffalo Bills have jumped up power rankings. If we're doing a power rankings with quarterbacks, I mean, Brock Purdy's not top 10, Sunil. He's probably top 3 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Guys like Burrow aren't even top 15, top 20. Joe Burrow is, if we're just strictly doing power rankings based off of what we've seen week to week this year, Joe Burrow is way down the list. Regardless of injury or whatever, people want to say, he's way down the list. Patrick Mahomes isn't a top 3 quarterback right now. Now, at the end of the year, I fully expect that he'll climb his way back up there because he's great. And obviously, when you say, okay, well, Brock Purdy's top 3, I mean, so what? Are you going to take him over this guy or this guy? No, if I'm taking a franchise guy, Brock Purdy, not even a full season in, I can't take him over guys that I've seen be great for years. I can't do that. But in this moment, is he playing very good football? And all that matters right now is this moment. All that matters right now is this team. And can this team win a Super Bowl? Not next year, doesn't matter. Not the year after that. And that's where I think a lot of people looked at me as, a hater of Brock or whatever, because I'm always looking towards the future. And so what I'm trying to do to be better, to have a better discourse around this conversation and actually, listen, I root for Brock Purdy. I'm going to do that. He's the 49ers quarterback. The real thing is, let's just live in the moment. I don't know what he's going to be in 2 years. I don't know if he can carry a team that's not loaded. I don't know. But should I even care right now when they don't have to make a decision to pay him? Should I even care when really this year is all that matters? I probably shouldn't. In this moment, what I know is Brock Purdy's playing great football, regardless of whether it's because talent's around him, great play caller. None of that matters. He's just playing good football. So let's give him credit for that. That's where I'm at with it. But then, the frustrating thing is, because it is week to week, you get people saying, overriding long-term careers or players who have been very good for a long time. And it's like, well, they had a bad week, so they suck. I'm not going to do that either. There's a group of guys that are established is very good or great quarterbacks in this league, those guys can have a bad week or two. Guys that aren't established yet in this league, Trevor Lawrence can't have a 5-game stretch where he's not good. Joe Burrow can, because Joe Burrow's proven it for longer.
Mm-hmm.
Josh Allen can. Patrick Mahomes can. Those guys have proven it. Jalen Hurts cannot. He doesn't have enough of a track record to say he's great. If Brock Purdy right now goes on a five-game skid where he's throwing 2 interceptions a game, 1 touchdown, and 210 yards, that changes the whole perspective on who he is. He can't afford to have 5 bad games yet in a row. Joe Burrow is, and people are letting him off the hook because he has multiple years of playing top-level football. People argued with me all offseason that he's better than Josh Allen, which good luck with that argument now. But either way, that was the argument. People like those guys deserve a little bit more grace than some of these other guys. So I'm just going to start taking it week to week. In a power ranking situation, Brock Purdy right now is top 3. I don't know where he's going to be at in 2 years. I'll worry about 2 years from now and 2 years from now, and that's where I'm going to sit with it.
I think that's fair. For me, Brock Purdy, in the circumstances that he's been placed in, has nothing to prove, right? New circumstances will come about, and then we could judge him in those circumstances. Do we want to see him in a moment where he has to do a game-winning drive late in a game with all the pressure on it in a meaningful game? Absolutely. Sure. He hasn't been put in that situation. So for us to be like, nah, he doesn't get credit for what he's in because he hasn't been put in this circumstance yet, I think that's unfair. He doesn't need to prove anything. In the games, he's played exactly the way you need him to play for this team to look the best that it has in quite a long time. And we can't, for people that say, hey, if he was, in this certain circumstance, he's not going to be as good as all of these players because his arm's too weak or this is too that or all this kind of stuff. You don't know just as much as I don't know, right? We have to wait and see if he, in those circumstances, how he responds. And to me, I think that's the grace that we have to give Brock Purdy is if you're holding against him circumstances that he's never been in, there's nothing he can do, and he will never be able to prove to you what he needs to prove because up until he gets put into those circumstances. But as far as the circumstances that he's been placed in, we've seen him at a historic blitz rate go out there and throw for over 300 yards. People wanted to say, oh, it was because of all the yak that, the receivers gave him. Then he comes out the next game, throws close to 300 yards, 280 plus with very minimal yak. Now nobody's like talking about yak as far as his yards. They're not even talking about the game he had. So to me, I think there's a certain fan base that Brock Purdy will never be enough until he wins 2 Super Bowls or whatever the case may be. But to me, I think he's done everything he needs to do, given the circumstances that he's given, to earn my trust. He's clearly earned the team's trust, Shanahan's trust. And I'm excited to see him against a much better defense with the Cowboys and how he responds, because these are the games that we really get to see, what he's capable of, even though we've seen him win 2 playoff games too. So it's pretty exciting what we have as far as a quarterback option right now in Brock Purdy.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what you can't do is, because you haven't seen something, hold that against him. You can say it's an unknown. You can't throw it in the negative category. You may not be able to throw it in the positive category because you can say, well, I don't know if he can or he can't. But that doesn't automatically make it a negative. This is things that happened a lot last offseason. This is why people looked silly and crazy with Aaron Banks last year, right? Because they lost a really good left guard. They were trying to replace him with Aaron Banks. Aaron Banks hadn't showed anything yet. All they saw was a small sample size in training camp and the year prior. And, oh my gosh, Aaron Banks isn't going to be good and this and this and that. And then Aaron Banks was really freaking good at football. But it was really
when
all
you put
him
in his actual position.
Right. But really what it was is we just didn't know. It was a lot of questions. And so automatically we took all those questions, and I say I'm just saying the community. So I didn't say these things about Aaron Banks, but we as a community, a big chunk, looked at Aaron Banks and took all those questions and said, oh, they're automatically negatives. Well, No, that's not true. We just don't know. So, yes, there are things that we don't know about Brock. That he hasn't been in certain situations. That doesn't mean he can't perform in those situations. Doesn't mean he's not going to perform in those situations. So you can't automatically say, well, when I'm looking at the positives of Brock Purdy or I'm looking at the negatives, that's under the negatives. You can't do that. You just say it's neutral. I don't know. And when he proves it, you say positive. If he doesn't prove it and he doesn't prove it multiple times, okay, now it's a negative. So that's just the way that it is. You just have to be open to it. The other thing about Brock Purdy, and this is what everybody has a preference on who, like what they want, what their prototypical quarterback looks like. This was also a topic of the offseason. It was like, okay, take your top 5 traits of a quarterback. We did it here on this show, I believe. Take your top 5 traits, put them in order, most important, least important. Well, some people's prototypical quarterback, based off of what Brock brings from an intangible standpoint, would be Brock Purdy. Like they look at Brock Purdy and they're like, oh my God, that's the best quarterback ever. I love it. And then some people like me are like, I look at Josh Allen and Justin Herbert and I'm like, bro, if only. Like everybody has a different preference in who they want their quarterback to look like. So what I'm trying to do is not hold things against him that he's never going to be. He's just not going to be those things. So I can't be out there like, well, you know, it looked sure he was 20 at 21 and, you know, they scored 30 points, but where was the wow throw? Like,
yeah.
Is that fair? That's not fair either. You know what I mean? It's just like he's doing good. So he's just doing good. He's the quarterback of the team. Root for the quarterback of the team. Be happy for it. Hopefully you keep winning. And that's it. Like, that's where it's at. So what more does he have to prove? This team has to prove they can win a freaking Super Bowl. Right. But going back to another conversation this offseason, I'm not going to blame Brock if they don't win a Super Bowl. I think that's the low-hanging fruit. That's what everybody's going to do. Well, they made it to an NFC championship with Jimmy Garoppolo. They made it to a Super Bowl and lost. Well, if they don't win with Brock, what more did he bring to the table that Jimmy didn't? I mean, if you can't see what more he brings to the table already, I don't know what to tell you. If they don't win a Super Bowl, it's not going to automatically be his fault either. So,
sure. Absolutely.
Anyway.
We have to wait and see how the game plays out, right? And for those that want to say, we could end on this with this question. Brock is Jimmy 2.0. I'm one of my friends. Shout out to Darshan if you're watching. He's a for-life 49er fan as well. And what he told me, he's like, man, every time Jimmy dropped back to pass, I was always holding my breath because I didn't know what kind of throw he was going to make. He's like, I don't have to hold my breath when Brock Purdy drops back, right? You're not worried about him. Yeah, you're not worried about him making a stupid pass or throwing a hospital ball for one of our receivers and all that kind of stuff. So there's a big difference between Brock Purdy and Jimmy. This offense obviously looks the best that it's ever looked, and we just have to wait and see what Brock Purdy does given new situations and new circumstances.
I can laugh at this now, but I just went through the emotions of being a 49er fan with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, because you've got the TV version, the broadcast version, where you can't see where the ball's going. And all you see is Jimmy break the pocket and do this. And you're going, oh God, please. Oh, there it is. So thank goodness they dropped that ball. That should have been picked. When Brock Purdy breaks the pocket or he throws downfield, I have zero worries. I'm not like, oh, here it comes. This is going to be the one. None of that ever enters my mind. And that feeling, or not having that feeling, is worth $1 million in gold easily, because it is so nice to not be stressed out every time the ball goes downfield and leaves the screen. And then you got to see what's going to happen. Oh, pick. All right. You don't get those feelings anymore. So right. Now that I'm out of the bad relationship, I feel much better about it. I can laugh about it.
Right.
All about the relationship. Brother Bob says, and Nails picked Burrow to beat us in the Super Bowl this year. Listen, hold on. Chill. All right. Everybody makes a preseason prediction. I had the 49ers in the Super Bowl last year. You didn't get mad at me last year when I picked them in the Super Bowl and they didn't go. All right. You didn't hold me accountable then. And I didn't know Joe Burrow would have a calf injury. All right. That was a bad pick. That was a really bad pick on my part. I tried to cover it up, but you're right. Dazza says Brock Purdy is definitely playing great football, but I want to see him win without CMC, and I want to see him lead a comeback against elite teams. And Dazza, I hear you. I think those questions to me become, when it's time to pay Brock Purdy, is he worth the $40-50 million a year? Can he be that guy? I don't want to live in that moment anymore. I want to live in right now. Can the 49ers win a Super Bowl right now? Is Brock Purdy enough right now? I'm just trying to live in the moment with this team more than ever. I don't want to worry about 2 years from now. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
And I don't even know why I want the answer to that question. It's like, do we?
I don't want to find it out this year. I don't want to see. I don't want to know.
Is Patrick Mahomes without Kelsey? We see what Patrick Mahomes right now is looking like without, a great receiving core around him. He's not looking like this all-world beater. He's still the best quarterback in the league. I wouldn't take that away from him. But if you're just going off of stats and the numbers and the eye test this year, he's not looking like the best quarterback in the league. Talent matters. Like, obviously, if you take great weapons away from any quarterback, Jesse, they're not going to look as good. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think that's something that we're saying unfair. Now, is CMC an amazing talent and makes any quarterback look better? Absolutely. But CMC with Jimmy wasn't looking the same way as CMC with Purdy, right? And as far as what the offense looked like, that has many points they're putting up and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a false argument to say, oh, well, I want to see Brock Purdy win without high-level talent. Any quarterback's going to look worse with high level of talent. You see a guy like Justin Herbert who has high-level talent, but you take away Austin Eckler, you take away Mike Williams, and he's making bad decisions late in games, and he's not looking like this all-elite quarterback throwing 300 yards a game with 0 interceptions like he was when he has all that talent around him. So I think that argument of just I want to see him win without all of this talent, I think that's a false argument. Every quarterback's going to look a lot worse without high-level talent.
Yeah. I mean, let's look at Justin Herbert's last game real quick. I don't even know what he did. Let me see.
He had a decent game, but he almost lost the game on his throwing an interception at the end of the game, like in the waning moments of the game and stuff.
Yeah,
like
by far his worst game of the season. The week before, the 2 weeks before, he had 710 passing yards.
Yeah.
Completed like 75% of his passes, had 5 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. So
Austin Eckler's been out the last 2 games.
Yeah, well, 2 games ago he had 405 yards, 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
This last game he lost. He didn't have Eckler, but he did have Mike Williams, who then got injured, and then this game he came back down to earth. So I see what you're saying. Yes.
But are we going to say that if we didn't have an opportunity, let's say Purdy wasn't around and Justin Herbert was our quarterback, are we going to be like he's trash because he can't? He's not putting up all these numbers with lesser talent. No, it's obviously you're going to look great with great
fan
talent.
bases are finicky. And don't get it twisted. The moment if Brock Purdy has a stretch of 3 games this year, people are going to lose their ever-loving mind on Brock Purdy. A lot of Charger fans don't like Justin Herbert, believe it or not. Like, you see, the fan bases are crazy toxic. This conversation outside of the Chiefs happens to every team in the league. As great as we look across the way and be like, man, that quarterback's fantastic. That fan base, there's some people that are like, nah, he's not the guy. Yeah, he has the 1 game every 4 that are whatever. He hasn't won a Super Bowl. Like, people have those conversations about every quarterback. This is not unique to the 49ers. Now, it's different because the 49ers have had like multiple guys over the last couple of years that should this guy be the guy? Should that be, very different conversation. But just is your starter the guy? This happens across the league. Like, the 49ers are not any more toxic than other fan bases. Trust me, I see it all over the place. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So, and Brock would be no different. He goes on a 3-game stretch, which I don't see happening right now. But if it did, people would lose their mind. And guess what? It'll be funny because the Brock Purdy hater will be like, just chill. Like, give the guy 3 years. And then you'll love me then. Like, you'll love Jesse then. Like, hold on. I mean, yeah, I'm with this guy. Give him 3 years. Like, what about the other 12 games? They didn't matter. He's right. Yeah. Yeah, Jesse, you're the Brock Purdy guy now. Like, that's the way the conversation will go. So this is the way that it is. Brother Bob says, can't wait till you're on with PP. He's talking about Krugs. He says, I'm bringing this up tomorrow night. No, excuse me, Thursday night. He and Vish will be on. Brother Bob says, I'm not crowning another quarterback till they win a Super Bowl. I crowned Cap and Jimmy Garoppolo. All they did was lose the Super Bowl. All I care about is Super Bowl. That's it, period. F all else. Hey, I'm not here to gatekeep your fandom, Brother Bob. Deborah says, didn't he come from behind in the Raider game? Pause. Golly. Yeah, I guess. I mean, sure. But I mean, that's not, again, then there's like, well, it wasn't a good team. And did he throw, was everything because of him? Was every pass completed because of him? Was whatever. I mean, it's never ending. Nobody will ever prove enough in this league, Deborah, I watch people crap on Josh Allen after a bad week 1. Let's not forget, here's the crazy thing. I don't see anybody saying anything. I'm going back to the Burrow well again. Burrow's got a boo-boo on his calf, and everybody's like, well, he's hurt. Like, what do you expect him to do? Josh Allen had a partially torn UCL. Remember that injury that Purdy had last year? That was a full tear. Josh Allen had a partial tear. Happened against the Jets the first game. He played the second half of the season with a partially torn UCL. And yeah, it didn't look great. Nobody gave him a pass. He comes in week 1. It's like, oh, see, he still sucks like Josh. And now it's like, oh, no? Okay, we're good over here? All right. People, like I said, all it takes is one bad week and these people are like going crazy. Dazza says, I agree, but the media and certain fans are comparing him to Montana, Young, and Mahomes. This goes both ways, though, Dazza. You're gonna have people that are way on that end, and you're still gonna have people that are way on the other end that just will give him zero credit. So, and it's not a lot. There's not a lot of people giving him zero credit. There's not a lot of people saying that he's Montana, Mahomes, Young, whatever. And you just got to kind of cut the noise out on both ends and just stay right here on Last Second Sports. All right. We'll have an even keeled conversation about it. That's what I'll say. All right. Let's talk about, well, nothing, because my computer didn't want to work for a second. You had a mystery question for me.
Yeah. And it's more.
I hesitate to ask what that mystery question is, but what is the mystery question?
Yeah. So, I mean, last week we put you through the fire a little bit. Had you stressed. It was great TV. Definitely to see you sweat a little bit on that. But, we discussed a little bit about, obviously, Patrick Surtain possibly being available. I think that has died down. I think that was more media hype than actual reality. I don't think he's on the blocks. However, we had the last time the 49ers were 4-0. They went to a Super Bowl. One of the key components to that was a midseason trade of Emmanuel Sanders. He played a big role in a position that needed some strength, right? The receiving core still had a rookie Debo. I think Kendrick Bourne was there, but didn't have like a bona fide leader, a bona fide, reliable player. So they traded for Emmanuel Sanders, and he came in and he played lights out and really, was a big reason why the 49ers had the run that they had. So this year, obviously the team looks pretty good, right? They look very good. A lot of people are looking at them as the favorite through the first 4 weeks to win the Super Bowl. We know that this regime is not opposed to pulling the trigger on a midseason trade if they feel like it'll take them to the next level. So I want to identify a player or two that you feel like the 49ers should go after, that will fit this criteria, right? So one is gonna be a 1-year rental like Emmanuel Sanders was. So you don't have to worry about money and bringing money on the books and feeling like you got to sign them long term. It's just a 1-year rental for this year. Okay. You can't use anything higher than a third-round pick.
Hired hitman.
Okay, hired hitman. You can't use anything higher than a third-round pick. So we're not trying to go like first-round pick for, some crazy deep like Brad Burns, right? We're not talking about that type of player. We're talking about a guy that's probably a vet, might be on the last year of his contract with his current team. The team knows that, one, they're not going to make the playoffs, and two, they're not going to sign this person long term. So let's get some assets for him before he just walks in the offseason type of thing. And that'll take the team to the next level.
There's one guy that has been brought up a lot, and I hesitate to say this one because I don't know if they can get him for a third. So I'll give you two players. The first one that I think would be an obvious slam dunk would be Danielle Hunter. He has a void year at the end of this year. He's not going to be back. I would be shocked if he's back with the Vikings. He's going to be 30 years old soon, basically the final year of his contract. So he fits all the criterias to only net a third-round pick. I think it's possible that if the Vikings keep losing, and I expect them to, that he could be had for a third, potentially. But I could see a team that's like really in the mix, if multiple teams get in a bidding war, that maybe, just maybe, somebody's willing to give up a second and even extend him. The 49ers, I don't think, would be that team. And obviously it wouldn't meet the criteria. So I'm not going to say him for sure. He's a possibility. But one guy that I do think they could get, and I don't even think it would take a third. I think they can probably get it done for a fourth, maybe a fifth or a couple fifths. This was a player that was signed very late this offseason. He's a guy that I wanted the 49ers to sign. I think a lot of people look at him and are like, oh, he's kind of a locker room issue. I don't believe that at all. I think he's very competitive. I think he's fiery. And I think that a team with the locker room that the 49ers have could take on a player that can get a little cagey, let's say. And it's at another position of need. We talk about corner. We were talking about Patrick Surtain last week. Yes, I would love to get Patrick Surtain and do all those other things. But a player that I think they could get for a fourth or maybe a couple fifths, Marcus Peters. Free agent at the end of the year, signed a 1-year deal. Again, was around very late. I wish the 49ers just outright signed him. They didn't do that. I think it's clear that Ambry Thomas, at least so far, has not been who the 49ers hoped he would be. As soon as he's out on the field, he gets picked on. Marcus Peters is still playing pretty damn good football. He's not the elite corner anymore. He's not the number one guy. But if you can get a guy like Peters and you can slide Demo into the nickel position, I feel very, very comfortable with Charvarius Ward, Peters, Deommodore Lenoir. So I'm going to say Marcus Peters. I think it's very realistic. Don't think it'll even take a third. I know it won't take a third to get him. That's the guy that I would say is the most realistic possibility that I can think of off the top of my head. I'll go Marcus Peters.
I like that because I have two players in mind. Peters is actually was a guy that was a third on my list, but I definitely think, much like in the 2019 year where the 49ers went to the Super Bowl, there's one group that definitely needs to be fortified, and it's the cornerback room. That year it was the receivers. This year it's the corners. And I think there's two players that kind of fit the criteria where they're guys that are a little bit older. The current team that they're with is probably not going to pay them the money that they're looking for. So they're looking to get assets, and possibly these teams, one for sure isn't going to be in the playoffs based off of how they're playing. The other one might have some beliefs now, but I contend that later on in the year, they're not going to feel that way as much. First person is, and this might be more of a hoop dream, but I do think he could fit the criteria, Kendall Fuller from the Washington Commanders. Right now, they obviously are playing pretty decent, so maybe they have some, hopes of winning, getting into the playoffs. So that might be a few weeks down the line if they lose, a couple of games and takes them out of contention. They might be looking to sell on a player like Kendall Fuller, who I think still has a lot of juice, can come in, be be a player that could really show out on a really good defense and play meaningful games throughout the year. So I think that would be one. The next one is Adoree Jackson from the New York Giants.
I would love Adoree. I don't. You
Adoree
think he'd be
Jackson
had for a third though?
Well, I think he's in the last year of his contract. I don't think the Giants are already look. They just paid a lot of money to a player that they're stuck with. I think that they're going to have to. They let Bradbury go. Is Adoree Jackson better than Bradbury? I don't know, because they didn't want to pay Bradbury the type of money that he wanted to. I think that they'd be looking to recoup draft picks. Probably not going to pay Adoree Jackson. They're not going anywhere. That could be somebody that the 49ers can eye and possibly get for a third rounder, just because the Giants are trying to just get off of money. So those are the two players that I'd be looking at that I think are possibilities for the 49ers to get.
I like Adoree Jackson. I would not be mad at that at all. So, yes, agree. Agree. Daza says, I heard Krug mention DJ Reed. He'd help. He would help, but I don't think he meets either of these criterias.
And I don't think he wants to come back to the 49ers.
Yeah, I mean, they did spurn him. That's one. But he's under contract through next year with the Jets. If the Jets traded him, they'd have to eat about $14 million in dead cap. I don't see the Jets doing that at all. I think he's a big part of what they're trying to do for at least through next year. So I don't think he meets the criteria of A, team willing to get rid of him, B, third round pick. But I would trust me, I would love to have DJ. Yeah, would he help just in a vacuum? Yes, he would absolutely help. But I just don't think he's realistic. Maybe we'll see. Flav says, not saying QBR is everything, but it's 1 meter that measures all around QB play. And bad QBs don't have free H to high QBRs. 84 is absurd. Hurts has a very talented roster too, and was at a 68 last year. I appreciate it, Flav, but dude, if I can't tell you what the hell goes into making a metric, I'm not. One thing that maybe you can find it. Good luck, but I don't think a number you've ever heard me spout, and you definitely won't hear it very often, is QBR or passer rating. I have no idea what the hell those things mean. No idea. I don't know what goes into them. I don't know the formula. And if I can't figure it out and figure it out quick, I'm not even going to talk to it. So I'm sure it's good. QBR was a ESPN metric that they came up with about it's probably like 15 years ago now. And I'm sure that they know what they're doing, but I couldn't tell you what the formula is or how it's weighted. So I don't know. You're not going to hear me talk about QBR. Arter Gazaran says, what about our in-house options, Womack and Luter? I agree with this, Arter. I think Womack can be very good. Luter is promising. I mean, he's got the body type for it. But unfortunately, both those guys are injured. I know Luter's coming back. They're both coming back soon. But I think I would feel more comfortable with the proven commodity for just this year and then worry about getting those guys worked in next year. I think I'm certainly by making the move that I made, and I think same with you, Sunil, making the move that you suggested. I don't think either of us are writing off Womack and Luter. But right now, Ambry Thomas is ahead of both those guys in the depth chart. Injury, what have you. And I don't trust Ambry Thomas. I am kind of done with the Ambry Thomas process. I would prefer to go get somebody that I do trust more than Ambry Thomas and then allow these two guys to grow and hopefully not have to play a lot of football. So Flav says, I hear you, but you never see a bad QB with a good QBR. It makes sense when you look at the list. Can't say the same for passer rating, though. Yeah, I don't. I'd have to look at it. You're probably right. I mean, sounds like you've put like a lot of thought into the QBR thing. I'm sure you've looked at it and like, okay, no, it just doesn't happen. But it's like, I'll give you an example. PFF, I think, is great for advanced analytics. I love the big time throw rate. I love the time to throw. I love their air yards, all the extra things. Their turnover worthy plays. I love all those because those are like tangible statistics and they're very easy to understand. What I don't like, however, I don't like their rating system. I don't know what goes into it. I mean, what the hell does it mean? How do I
Well,
know that it's good or that it's bad? We do know. We've heard, some of the flaws in it or whatever, but I just don't like an ancillary number that's like, okay, cool. They've got a rating system and I appreciate it. It sells a lot of subscriptions and whatever. I like the advanced analytics. They're very, very, like I said, very easy to understand. They make a lot of sense. And I actually prefer some of those advanced analytics over things like completion percentage, touchdowns, interceptions. I like to know the percentages. I like to know when an interception is the quarterback's fault or the receiver's fault. I think those things are more important than the actual raw number of turnovers or not turnovers. So I like personally some of those advanced analytics. I just don't know what the hell goes into QBR. So I'm just not going to talk about it.
yeah, and this last game against this Jet, Patrick Mahomes' QBR was 66. So, do we think Patrick Mahomes is a bad quarterback? No, he just had a bad game. So, who knows?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Kenny G says, "What about Bradbury?"
No way the Eagles will
not
trade
coming
Bradbury.
from the Eagles. They're not. Yeah, they're like, oh, we're in contention with this one team. Let's give them a really good player. Let's do that. That would be funny though, with all the ish that Debo talked. Though I'm not gonna lie. Okay, I'm not gonna get into that one. Let's get into the last one. What is the biggest obstacle for the 49ers versus the Cowboys? We don't talk a lot about the upcoming opponent on our Tuesday show. I think we're both very excited about this week. It feels like football or 49er football is really getting ramped up at this point, playing the Cowboys. It's a fun game. Like I said, maybe not a rivalry quite yet because they haven't won a game, and I think they're going to be desperate to do so in this newer 49ers Cowboys rivalry. But there are some obstacles that the Cowboys present. In your opinion, what is the biggest obstacle that they present for the 49ers?
For me, I think it's a team where at its best, well, I would say this. In 99% of matchups that the 49ers go up against, on paper, they are head and shoulders above when it comes to talent on a roster. This will be the first team that they play this season that can't be said accurately, right? The Cowboys have a lot of weapons, a lot of high-level talent at all levels of their roster, just like the 49ers have. Now, the difference between the 49ers and the Cowboys is the 49ers have played a lot more consistently on both sides of the ball, where the Cowboys haven't, especially on offense. But to me, the biggest challenge is, Jesse, is they're going to be able to contend in all phases of the game. There's not a blatant weakness that you can take advantage of where the 49ers are that much better than them. Like where you can just say they're for sure better at this position, that position, all this kind of on this side of the ball and that side of the ball. So to me, it's the first real challenge for the 49ers that now if you make a mistake, it could be the difference between you not winning the game and not winning the game because you're just not that much more talented than the opposing team.
Yeah, they do have a lot of talent. I question their ability to stop a team that's just going to run it at them repeatedly. Now, that's been a problem for him in the past. That was a problem again for him against Arizona, although different styles of running. So we saw that Connor gave the 49ers a little bit of an issue as well. So, maybe they can just run the ball pretty good, especially with Dobbs. I mean, the only team to go over 100 yards rushing against the 49ers is Arizona, but they put a hurting on the Dallas Cowboys. So we'll see about that. But you're right. I mean, talent for talent, this is the most complete team that the 49ers have played. I think the biggest obstacle we may not even see. And I think the biggest obstacle is when they are playing from ahead of teams. And that is just the ability to get after the quarterback and force them to make mistakes. You see it week in and week out. If they get a lead, they can get to your quarterback very quickly. They have good coverage guys. Even with Diggs out, Deron Bland is a very, very good corner. He was a starter last year. The only reason he wasn't starting this year is because they went and got Gilmore. He is not Trayvon Diggs. I'm not saying he's on that level or playing on that level, but this man did, I believe, had 2 picks this last week. And one of them, I think, was a pick 6. He's a very good football player. So, yes, they have a drop off, but he's an up and coming player. He's still very good. That secondary is still very good. I think the defense overall is very good, but they're built a little bit different. They're built to play from ahead and force turnovers and just kind of pile on teams, and that's what they do. I don't know if that obstacle is going to show itself against the 49ers. If it does, it is a major obstacle. It's very real, very, very real. This is what the Cowboys do. This is what they prefer to do. So that can be a potential obstacle. And then just overall, the talent, like you talked about, that is, the 49ers are more talented, I believe, but this team can hang with you in the talent department. There are players all over the place. They have a very good offensive line. They have very good pass rushers. They have good corners, good safeties, very good receiving core, good running back, good quarterback. I mean, they're stacked. They are a very, very good team. So they present the biggest obstacle for sure on paper this year compared to all those other teams that the 49ers have played. They have not played rather a complete team like the Dallas Cowboys yet. Still don't think it'll be enough though.
I mean, I think this stat usually indicates who wins or loses no matter the talent difference, but specifically with this talent difference, whoever wins the turnover battle is winning this game.
Ryan says you're stacked, Jesse.
Pause.
Nah, let it ride. Let it ride. Flav says 66 is high, Sunil. That's what I'm saying. Hurts was a 68 last year, and he was in an MVP race. That's what makes Purdy being an 84 insane. I'm going to take your word for it, Flav.
Cool.
I'm not even going to argue with you on it. I'm sure it is insane. I don't even know. How can a 66 out of 100 be good? Isn't that like a D? Like, that's how I got graded anyways. 66 would have been a D. So I don't know. But again, I'll take your word for it, Flav. I'm sure. And Purdy's just playing ridiculous football anyways. I don't need QBR to tell me that. Like, I'm watching week in and week out. He's playing pretty damn good. So I'm with you on it. I agree with the QBR. He's playing good football. So Neil, thanks again for a great show. Appreciate you. I'll see you again.
No grades. We didn't have time for the
we didn't even
awards.
have time for that. We didn't have time. We had 2 more topics that we didn't even get to. Right? I got to have energy and save these vocal cords for the rest of the week. I got 2 shows tomorrow night. I got After Dark with Grant, and then right after that, Behind Enemy Lines with the Boss Cowboys. Get ready, 49er fans. I need you to bring it. Cowboy fans are going to be in the chat. It's going to be a ton of fun. I cannot wait for that show. I did a show with him after the Trey Lance trade. It went bonkers. You guys loved him. He is coming back. Boss Cowboy and myself tomorrow night, Behind Enemy Lines. Make sure you tune into that. And until then, peace.